interview is part of the History Heard project. The content of this interview may be used for historical research. However, no part of the video itself may be reproduced without the express written permission of an authorized representative of History Heard. Today is February 16th, 2009 at 8:30 p.m. This is an interview with Richard Allen in Bradenton, Florida. He was born on December 11th, 1951 in Boston, Massachusetts. So in 1968, there was a political liberalization movement called Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia, headed by Alexander Dubček. This movement resulted in an invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union. I understand that you were in Europe at the time of the invasion. What was your experience in this situation?
Well, it was a very interesting experience. My older brother and I were living in Amsterdam for the summer. He was working for Time Inc., which is the parent company, or was at that time the parent company of Time magazine, so he had some press credentials. The Prague Spring had been a dramatic liberalization in Czechoslovakia. It was called Prague Spring. It actually lasted for 8 or 9 months. In fact, you may have seen the movie The Incredible Lightness of Being, which tells the story. At any rate, we were in the middle of the Cold War, which was a very tense time between the United States and the Soviet Union. At that time, Europe was very different. The Soviet Union had not collapsed, so there were Western European countries that were allies of the United States and what were called Soviet bloc countries that were allied with Russia. Czechoslovakia was one of those countries. The Prague Spring was led by a fellow named Alexander Dubček, who replaced the earlier head of Czechoslovakia, a fellow named Novotny. And there was a lot of concern around the world as to whether or not the Russians, Brezhnev was at that time head of the Soviet Union, whether the Russians would tolerate this liberalization. And it appeared that they would allow it for quite a while. So it was very exciting throughout Europe. A lot of European leaders and people thought that this meant that other Soviet bloc countries might go through a similar experience to what was happening in Czechoslovakia. But there was still this fear that Russia would not tolerate it. They had invaded Hungary when Hungary had tried to revolt back in the 50s. And since this was 1968, it was only 10 years after, or 10, 15 years after the Hungarian Revolution. So people were nervous, but they were also excited. Certainly our parents didn't think the idea of going to Czechoslovakia during this time was a good idea, because people in the United States were very concerned that Russia would invade Czechoslovakia. Being young and foolish, we didn't think there was much risk that would actually happen, so that we sent a telegram home to our parents that since we couldn't tell them we were going to Czechoslovakia, we sent a telegram home saying that we had decided to take a vacation and we're going to Italy, and that we'd be out of touch for a while. Of course, we then immediately got in the car and started driving towards Czechoslovakia. We first stopped in Berlin. We left Amsterdam, went to Berlin. Berlin at the time was, again, not the way it is today. Berlin was divided in two. There was an East Berlin and a West Berlin. East Berlin, half of the city was controlled by the Russians, half by the German allies of the United States. And a lot of people don't realize that Berlin at that time sat entirely in East Germany. So although half of Berlin was an ally of the United States and belonged to what we call Germany, it actually, the entire city sat inside East Germany. So just to get there, you had to drive through an Eastern European country. So we got to Berlin. We stayed there. We spent some time at the Berlin Wall. We actually were camping and camped practically next door to the Berlin Wall. We were able to walk over at night, watch the searchlights, looking for people trying to escape. There were East German guard towers all along the wall where they'd shoot people that tried to escape from East Germany to West Germany. And then we decided to head to Prague, which it was the capital of Czechoslovakia, to see what was going on. As it turned out, my older brother, as we were leaving our friends in Berlin, celebrated a little bit too much, drank a little too much beer, I think, and ended up oversleeping the next morning. Since it was a long drive from Berlin to Prague, we decided to delay the trip one day. Now, that was either the luckiest or the unluckiest thing that ever happened, and I'm not sure which, because by staying that one extra day, instead of arriving in Prague on August 20th, we were planning then to arrive on August 21st. Well, along with us on August 21st, there were some 200,000 Russian troops and troops from other Soviet bloc countries that invaded on August 21st at the same time. So that was very scary. As we got up and started driving towards Prague, the news reports were coming in that the Soviet Union had invaded Czechoslovakia. This meant we couldn't actually get into Czechoslovakia, so we had to drive from Germany across Austria and into Hungary. And in Hungary, there's a city called Bratislava, where, well, let me back up for a second. Coming across East Germany was pretty scary, because as we were on the highway, we were constantly stopped by East German soldiers who demanded to see our documents, and because of my brother's press credentials, we were allowed to continue. But at one time I can remember us being forced off the road, separated, just like in the movies. East German soldiers with German shepherds, sort of growling, soldiers with machine guns, separating us, demanding in German to see our documentation, and we were wondering sort of why. Well, we found out why at this particular time, because 100 yards down the road there was an overpass, and as we looked, the highway that crossed our highway, as far as you could see, a mile or two in either direction, was nothing but Soviet troops on their way into Czechoslovakia as part of the invasion. So it was pretty hair-raising from time to time. At any rate, we got through East Germany, crossed Austria, and then entered Hungary, which was also a Soviet bloc country. But a couple of guards probably should not have, but were allowed us, because of the press credentials, to come into Hungary. There was one checkpoint where I'm pretty sure we were not supposed to be allowed to continue. Essentially every car that went along the road was turned away. I think the guard saw that we were Americans, saw that my brother had press credentials from Time, and sort of smiled at us and deliberately let us through. I think, we have a sense that everybody was against this. No, there were certainly young people who were soldiers in the military in Soviet bloc countries who thought what was happening in Czechoslovakia was good and that the invasion wasn't good. And perhaps this fellow at least wanted to see that American press got in. So we made our way to, as I say, to Hungary, and stopped in Bratislava, which is tucked in a little corner that sort of is where Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Austria all sort of meet together. And I remember one lunch we had there, we were able to basically sit and look at a checkpoint that flowed from Hungary into Czechoslovakia, while we weren't allowed to go into Czechoslovakia through the checkpoint. We watched as army truck, jeeps, tanks, and just an unimaginable amount of soldiers just all afternoon flowed from Hungary into Czechoslovakia. There were, I believe that on the 21st of August, and within a couple of days, between the Russian troops and Hungarian troops, East German troops, more than 200,000 Soviet bloc troops entered Czechoslovakia as part of the